The old man, however, is still angry, smashed the chess piece to snap. What do you mean just like that? What do you mean, toying with the feelings of other young girls, the old man cliché, and began to tell Michael about Grace's grandfather Tyler back then in the battlefield to block the bullets for his own, if not Tyler for him to block the bullets to waste a hand, his life would have been lost in the founding of the country, the old man. The old man, began to tell Michael about Grace's grandfather Taylor back then in the battlefield to block the bullets for himself. If Grace is in trouble, I'll help her. If she's in trouble at home, I'll help her if I can, and I'll never pass it up. Michael's down a peg. Grace, me and her, no, the old man was anxious. No, what do you mean no, what do you mean, Grace, which is not good, you and she cannot, and Ivy's little girl, you and others grew up together, I see you are a childhood sweetheart, how can not, people Amelia little girl do not want you, gone, you want to wait also cannot wait for the Michael Wren's old man is splitting hairs. The old man sighed, I do not force you, but you are almost 30 years old, sooner or later you have to live with someone, people still have to look forward, you and the girl in July less destiny, think about something else. Since it won't work, make it clear to Song. Don't hold up the girl. Michael laughed, and answered, loudly, yes.It was sunset, and Michael was propped up with one hand on his second-floor balcony looking out at the view. The compound is full of these small, detached, two-story buildings, with open, tree-lined roads underneath. He saw Benjamin's car pull in, and dare say it was all coming home for the weekend to spend time with the old folks at home, and as far as the eye could see, there were memories of a group of people who had grown up together. The path under the shade of the trees, which had been traveled together, the wall, which had been scaled by several men together, and which Ivy, as his tail, could not scale, and pitifully watched them on the wall from the foot of the wall, and which went out of his building, and went a little farther on, and then turned to the left, and was Ivy's house, but the little court at the far end was where a few of them played together, and a couple of little girls were sitting on the side steps cheering them on. And Ivy always has the gentle and soft atmosphere of an Englishwoman, she wears a plain dress. Looking at the field without saying a word, as quiet as a splash of ink landscape painting, but every time he turned around, he could see the love and adoration crying out in her eyes. During the break, she silently unscrewed the water and held it out to him. A few other people red-eyed, obviously already have water in their hands, but also said that July's sister how not to give them water. Ivy thin-skinned, but still took the rest of the water, pretending to calmly unscrewed a bottle of water to hand to the other people, the touchy feely. Michael didn't even want to stay at the compound much over the years, and drove back to his place after dinner. Olivia desperately tried to explain Grace and Michael's relationship to Ivy as soon as she left the clinic. She'd been mad at Michael for years, but Sister July loved it, that Grace really has nothing to do with Michael. If there is a relationship, it's because Michael's grandpa insisted on it. I don't think Michael is interested in her at all, it's always been her initiative. You've got your stomach pains down. And you've got the strength to talk so much. Ivy's concern isn't so much about Michael and Grace's relationship as it is about Michael not accepting her anymore. It's been 3 years, she realized that it's easier to just walk away than anything else. The hard part is the person who stays behind. 3 years ago she did the desertion, leaving him to bear all the burden. Will he forgive her? The Michael was either in the army or on a mission during the week, and on the rare occasions when he came back, other than going back to the compound to visit his elders, he stayed at his own place. His place was less than 100 square meters. He paid the down payment with his own saved salary before he and Ivy got engaged. Even the decoration style was according to Ivy's preference. At that time, he thought that they would have a home soon. The Michael came out of the elevator and was pulling out his keys to open the door when he saw a man. That the girl standing in front of his house was deliberately dressed up, with cold makeup, a black cake dress, a slender neck and protruding collarbones that made her as beautiful as a black swan. She seemed to be tired of standing, leaning against the door, lifting her right foot and shaking her ankle. The thin heel of her high-heeled shoes shook through. It looked like it had to be 8 or 9 centimeters anyhow. The Michael frowned. Ivy froze when she saw Michael coming, stood up straight. Andy didn't realize security was so bad here anymore. He walks by, moves over. I opened the door. Ivy moved a few steps to the side, but refused to move too far away from him. I followed someone else up here. She asked David before she came, and David told her that Michael was still living here. And David asked her what she was going to do, and she didn't have the heart to tell David, and she didn't know if he was there or not. After all, he didn't have a lot of leave, and he was in the army pretty much all year round, so let's take our chances. And Michael is an all-encompassing person. When he bought the house here, the most important point is security, followed by Supporting facilities, he can not often be around her, she a little girl to live in the place, naturally have to be safered. I in this neighborhood, you need fingerprints to open even the cell doors. Michael opened the door and propped his hand on the doorframe to watch Ivy, she doesn't say a word. He pulled the doorknob to close the door. Go back if there's nothing else, she snapped and reached over to grip the door handle as well, and pushed her way in as hard as she could. Michael not unable to squeeze her, but afraid of hurting her, she came in by the way and he didn't change his shoes, he turned around and headed inside, nothing to look at in a good light. The Ivy didn't care that she still had her heels on, she jogged over to Michael and hugged him from behind. No matter what, I really know I'm wrong. I'm sorry, Xiaoxuan. Let's be good, okay? Michael's body is lean and magnificent, with broad shoulders and narrow waist, arched buttocks and long legs, and unlike some of the muscular men of today, each of his muscles is tightened to the right degree, giving the impression of strength without exaggeration. Ivy's hand moved restlessly, down and then down, creeping up on his belt buckle, as if electrified. He snapped off her hand and he didn't control the force, bone against bone made a not-so-subtle thumping sound. And he swept his pale eyes over to see that the back of her hand was already red and Ivy's dark eyes had a resigned look in them, but she just wouldn't give up, stepping forward and clasping her hands tightly around his waist again. He hit her, and she was in pain, but what was such pain compared to what he had been through? When I saw you with Grace today, I was really scared. Michael's head was bowed, looking at her hands clasped around his waist, the corners of his mouth curved slightly. Afraid of what? I'm afraid that one day you'll get married to someone else and have kids and never look back. Spoken as if she knows everything. Michael didn't answer, her head rubbed against his back. You must not be together, right? He didn't want to answer her question. She and he grew up together, how to say, has been his follower for many years. The slightest loosening of his attitude, she is sensitive to feel it. I'll stay here tonight, okay? No way. He went back into his bedroom and after a while opened the door and came out, having changed his set of clothes, and he grabbed the car keys off the table and was about to leave. Ivy's getting antsy. He's just leaving. Where are you going? Hearing Ivy's inquiry, he paused for a moment. And this girl is not wearing any shoes, and her 10 white toes are pointing on the ground like this. He frowned, put his shoes on, and she looked at him stubbornly and just wouldn't wear it. Where are you going? I'm really impressed. Going home. He said the home is the compound. Yesterday when you went back. His father Thomas to the troops below to sympathize with the officers and soldiers, did not see on. Today the person came back. He always want to meet before returning to the unit. The Ivy's happy, and I'm back. She promised Rose she'd be home for dinner this weekend. It had been a long time since he and she had been back at the compound together like this. Michael was driving and Ivy was sitting in the passenger seat on her cell phone. The circle of friends she had posted in the morning had been liked by many people, mostly co-workers or former classmates, unaccountably David. Ouch, this speed can be so fast to the house. Last night. Evil face, she opened WeChat to add a friend, tried to type in Michael's old phone number, and an account popped up that looked like his. She whimpered, my cell phone is dead, let me borrow it for a call. He was driving and was not in a position to make too many movements, and raised his chin to indicate the direction of his cell phone. The Ivy brought her phone over, it had a password, she didn't even think about it and started typing in the numbers. It was really the right thing to do. It was effortless to find his WeChat. She smiled brightly, and sure enough, she saw that she had just sent in a request to add a friend to her phone. She tapped accept, closed the background, and then put his cell phone back where it had been. The not to call. No more fighting, and almost home. Ivy gathered her waist-length hair. I'll walk through here. It wasn't far from the compound, and surrounded by troop houses, and safe, and Michael didn't object, and parked and dropped off. It was the moment when the scenery and the air were at their best in Washington. When the sun was not too dry, when the breeze was just right, and when Ivy walked slowly among the shadows cast by the sun. This big road full of French sycamores. Ivy had followed Michael and a few of them many times, going to and from school together, watching them jostle along the way, and time rushes like water. She'd heard from Olivia after she'd left that even the relationship between Michael's and Ivy's had become delicate, and now, surprisingly, she didn't even have the courage to go into the compound with Michael. There was a new sentry at the gate, who did not recognize Ivy, and stopped her stiffly, and Ivy didn't have her ID with her, or anything else to prove she was John's daughter, and was struggling to explain herself when a little pink car pulled up next to the person in the car is dressed in the same color as the car, pink eye-catching. She took off her sunglasses. Little brother, I said, how you do? This is the real Chief John's daughter. My sister in July. How can you let you stop here? Olivia was the deviant little princess of the Edge family, known throughout the compound, and the sentry knew her, and took her at her word, and looked incredulously at Ivy, and released. The closer she got to home, Ivy's feelings instead became more and more complicated. Although Olivia was big-headed, she could see the difference in Ivy. Sister July, don't worry, that person isn't there, since he broke his leg, but he subsided. The person Olivia's talking about is Ivy's sister, Amelia. What did she do? Ever since that incident, Ivy had become extremely disgusted with Amelia, but beyond the disgust, there was endless pity. A girl who had been left with a lifelong disability, wouldn't her future be bleak? What saddened Ivy even more was the attitude of her mother, Rose. After that incident, the Rose graciously showed her forgiveness, but in her heart she condemned her, deciding that she had something to do with what happened to Amelia. Olivia, who has never liked Amelia, is bored and says that in Tibet, turning to the Buddha to write a new book. It turns out that in the intervening years, Amelia has become a best-selling author by storm. Ivy curled her mouth mockingly. It was rare for her to be quiet. Do you know how desperate I was at that time? She was acting like a victim in front of everyone, and Mom didn't believe me, and that day when I heard what Michael and Mom were saying, I didn't think I could really live, and Ivy choked back a sob and couldn't say any more. The final straw that broke her back was a conversation she overheard between Michael and her mother after that incident. She's running for her life. Then, as time went on, she thought about what Michael had said, and felt that she had really dimmed her mind, and taken it out of context. The family was in perfect harmony at the table, tacitly not mentioning Amelia as if the incident had never happened. John ran a strict military, but never used that on his daughter. He was a loving father, always asking Ivy about her time in Afghanistan, the kind of place that many people don't want to go to, and Ivy stayed for 3 years. He kept his mouth shut. But in his heart he was very proud of it. Home. Rose wasn't as serious as she was in the office, but there were few words between her and Ivy. Ivy doesn't know why. She remembered that when she was a child Rose had favored Amelia, and in front of Amelia Rose was always pleasant, and after so many years Rose had not treated her harshly, but when faced with her Rose was either hand-wringing or cold and distant. The Rose used to take Amelia shopping for dresses, and would buy them for Ivy, but never took her along, but bought them and put them in her closet. Quietly, Ivy had been puzzled. After a meal, Rose only spoke, "Tonight live at home, tomorrow with me too." The unit, "What is missing with Auntie?" said, "A moment to let Auntie to buy for you," Ivy answered. "I'll get it myself." She went back to her room upstairs, which was furnished as usual, not a speck of dust on the table or chairs, and the duvet cover and sheets were so clean they looked like they had been cleaned regularly. She had the habit of taking a nap, and today she didn't expect to have slept through it, and when she woke up it was already past 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Olivia tweeted her, "Sister July, they're playing at the little basketball court, are you coming or not?" As if she was afraid Ivy wouldn't be sure which one of them it was, Olivia sent another, "Someone who was also in the 20 or 30 minutes ago. Ivy's on her way." She came to her senses, got out of bed, went to find her clothes, and the clothes in her closet were the ones she wore when she was in high school and college. She hadn't changed her figure in the last few years. But she was getting older and some of them didn't fit her very well anymore. The looking around, her eyes finally rested on a white dress that the corners of Ivy's mouth turned up slightly. "It's it. I thought Michael was there. It's just the right dress to wear." The ball game was in full swing when Ivy arrived. Michael dribbled the ball, David wanted to intercept and Michael deftly avoided. David's teammates rushed up again, Michael carelessly raised his hand, both avoiding people. The ball also made a parabola into the basket. Olivia sat bored, wiggling her legs on the steps by the court. She couldn't be bothered. If it wasn't for Ivy, she'd have slipped away. The Ivy sat down next to Olivia. Olivia pouted at Ivy. "Brother David is so noob, too." Ivy laughed. David was suffering from not having been in the military. "The game's over, and it goes without saying that the team Michael's on one." Ivy looked around, and Olivia hurriedly carried over the plastic bag beside her and offered it to Ivy, filled with the water she'd bought. Ivy got her water and headed for the court just as Michael dribbled by. He hadn't seen the girl in that white dress again for a long time, and remembered her wearing it often when she was in high school. And on the few summer vacations he'd had when he was in college. Fair and compact melon face, soft and waist-length hair, floating white dress. When not talking just like a dusty posture, when talking the voice is soft, like hooking the hearts of the people. Michael had been a popular figure for girls to chase since he was a child, and even later, when he arrived at the military academy. The scanty number of female cadets lavished him with the lion's share of attention. Ivy's the only one he'll eat. As he passed Ivy, Michael smiled to himself, sidestepped. Instead, Ivy deliberately met him, poking his arm with her index finger, muscles hard as iron, and "Xiaojuan, drink some water." She handed him a bottle of water, looking natural, not squirming at all, like the two of them had never been apart before. the Michael was accompanied by a number of other people, all of whom, except for the better-known ones, looked as if they had no idea what was going on. When did Ivy's little July come back and hook up with Michael again? David waved his hand. Go go go, are you guys tired? Still standing here? Hurry home to eat. A group of people on the face of interest, but inside the gossip scattered, out of a long way there are still people often turn back. When Michael wouldn't take the water, Ivy kept her hand up, eyeing him, and Michael cradled the ball at his side with one hand, took the water with the other, unscrewed it and took a sip and capped it again, and headed out onto the field with the ball clutched in one hand and the water in the other. The area around the stadium was long gone, and the guys were running pretty fast under David's direction. He licked his lower lip and snorted. Ivy was doing a good job with this crowd. Twilight was falling, the sky was darkening, and my ears were filled with the rustling of the lush French sycamores as they were buffeted by the wind. The Michael moved forward on his feet, and Ivy followed him silently. She couldn't fathom what mood he was in, only that he shouldn't have been angry. That when he was really angry, the aura on his body was especially harsh, not to mention her. Even David would have to retreat when he met him. But then she felt like he was holding his breath and didn't really want to pay attention to himself. Michael stopped abruptly, jerked back, and Ivy managed to collect her footing and almost bumped into him. The compound was built early. The streetlights were dim, and it was hazy to see people under the streetlights. It seemed to Ivy that Michael was sizing her up, head to toe, over and over, and following me. For what? His voice didn't ripple. Ivy thought hard for a moment, and spoke frankly, wanting to follow you. He gave a chuckle, inaudible, and wanted to see you hurt. Ivy didn't have much cheek to speak of in front of Michael in the first place, not to mention the fact that it was dark enough that she couldn't even read his expression clearly. He hooked his lips a little playfully, wanting to see that there was a bit of a gangly quality to the words. She nodded, wanting to see that. He released his grip on the basketball, and the ball fell to the floor, not waiting to bounce before he stepped on it with precision, and he casually lifted up the jersey he was wearing, rather casually, to show her that the Ivy's eyes fell to Michael's muscular belly, moving up a little, and then up again, covered by the dress. That Ivy's hand went under Michael's shirt, and he quickly reached out and held her hand down. Where else do you want to go? Ivy bites her lower lip. I need to see your injuries, where you touched just now, that is. His words were harsh, her eyes were foggy, not real in the light, and her heart on the no. He's still the same. I don't believe it. Ivy's voice was mournful. She was really afraid. They were broken like this. He was completely out of her life. He no longer shared any more fiery feelings, hurts big or small, with her, and she's done wrong. But she's not happy about it. She insisted on placing her hand there, a little further up, on his chest, his heart, at a standstill. Michael loosened his grip and she looked at him sluggishly, surprised, and continued to explore. Her fingertips were hot, like they were on fire, and Michael felt his heart burn a little, too, and it hurt, and she moved up, trembling, and he took a deep breath, and went with her, and finally, she touched the wound. That even just feeling it with my hands, I found it hideous. And Ivy raised her other hand and hesitated for a few moments before carefully lifting Michael's shirt further up. The scar was so clear that, even in such dim light, you could see that it looked like a huge bug, unevenly stretched across the left side of his chest. She had no time to be surprised, no time to sigh, only the tears fell one after the other. And just looking at the wound, yet a scene in her mind was of him on a mission, having never experienced, but empathizing with, he put his clothes down, a little distracted. And July, there are things you can't do anything about, even if you see them. Ivy shook her head and choked back a sob. I can do this. I want to be with you for the rest of my life. And he grinned, and strutted forward, ball in hand. I don't want to. The head of the compound has a small supermarket. A long time ago, when they were small, or a kiosk, only sell some small snacks, and then cigarettes, wine, tea and sugar began to sell, and then later became what it looks like today. The boss has not been changed. Is a general in the compound of a certain general's old subordinates, because of the disability, retired, and now there is a special cashier. The boss does not often come. Why are you following me? What are you doing? Michael's eyes swept through the glass case, finally allowing a box of his usual cigarettes to be taken. Buy cigarettes, get back in line. And Ivy then remembered that it was Sunday already. You always have to eat before you leave. I have to shop too. Wait for me. Ivy headed inside the mini-mart, whether Michael answered or not. She will not often live in the compound. To buy things are also simple, a few towels, toothbrushes, toothpaste only. Skincare products did not bring. The good thing is that her skin is good and not picky. There are good will use good, at the moment in the shelves. Randomly take it can be accepted. The price is a little cheaper, but in the good thing is that the regular brand. She hurriedly paid and came out, only to see Michael smoking with his back to the supermarket door. This guy, even when He's smoking, he makes you look handsome, his back is long and straight, like the poplar in the desert of yellow sand that will not fall for 1,000 years, but I feel that there is a massive sorrow around him that cannot be melted, and it is entangled in his life. When did he start smoking so much? She doesn't know that's like missing him getting hurt. Missing so many moments of him. She walked over to him, kicked him gently in the heel, walked away, and Michael gave Ivy a look, stubbed out the cigarette in his hand, threw it in the trash can, and the two were walking one behind the other, Ivy in front and Michael behind. She seemed to have gotten into the habit, from a young age, of being immensely at ease whenever she was with Michael. The Ivy arrived home first and stood in the doorway. She saw Michael's stride and thought better of waving goodbye to him, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs recently cooperated with a TV station to make a program about the work and life of diplomats through interviews, and every division in the ministry had to contribute, and the translation division, where Ivy worked, was no exception. The station picked and chose in the division, and eventually found 2 good candidates for the job. When it was time for the taping of the show, the network said they wanted to add 1 more person, naming Ivy to go over there. Ivy work time is short, experience is also less, but that year, once joined the ministry to apply for a long distance to the hard places in the ministry is well known. The program team should be valued as also her this special experience. On Friday afternoon, Ivy showed up at the TV studio right on time. She wore light makeup and a slightly casual formal dress, with a calm and gentle brow. The host in charge of her interview hadn't arrived yet, the staff was busy setting up the venue, and she was sitting on the edge of the seat quietly flipping through the information she had brought with her. The interviews took the form of a live broadcast. The TV station gave an outline of the questions in advance, and the information was prepared according to the TV station's outline. 30 minutes before the interview was to begin, the host, Grace, hurriedly pushed her way through the door, and she wore a small sky blue suit, with a standard anchor haircut, demure and elegant. The Ivy looked up just in time to see Grace, with a professional smile, offering her hand. She stood up, put the information on her chair, shook Grace's hand, and after shaking Ivy's hand, Grace didn't mind the messiness of the scene, casually pulling over a folding chair and sitting down face to face with Ivy. I planned and initiated this talk show. I had a dream of becoming a diplomat since I was a child, and then, as you can see, Grace spoke with a slight hint of regret, and Ivy smiled, and your current job is enviable, too. I was the one who must have asked them to invite you, and I think your experience is peculiar, Grace mused, and desirable, and thank you. The conversation between the two had been polite, and the talk show is officially on the air. Grace is a professional conversationalist who is as good at throwing out questions as she is at listening. Ivy's job as a translator requires her to be clear-headed and quick-thinking, which makes it a lot easier in comparison. Even though the show is live, most of the way through the interview, Grace's conversation turned to the love life of the diplomats. And does Ivy have a boyfriend now? No, ever been in love before? When was the last time? Ivy smiled, looking unconsciously sad. There was a time. We broke up 3 years ago. Was it because of the job? Grace's question carried a purpose. Grace was such a smart girl. Ivy could not believe that she and Michael parted from each other, a matter known to all. Grace had not inquired from others, even if the people who knew back then did not want to mention it more. With Grace's ability, she could still guess from others only words or two. Ivy's eyes raked with amusement, and she hooked the corners of her mouth in a manner somewhat similar to Michael's when he smiled badly. It's because I'm too timid. Ivy smiled a light smile. Grace knew there was nothing else to ask on the subject, and that wasn't the point of the "have you been in touch since?" Ivy's frowning. No. Anyone you like right now, or have any plans for relationship-wise? Ivy thought for a moment and looked seriously at the camera. Before I left Afghanistan? There was a fire in the embassy. The scene was very chaotic for a while. At that time I was trapped in a vast fire with a little girl who had just been rescued. Even I thought I was going to die. But a man came stepping into the flames and saved us. He was a military man who had come on evacuation mission, and he was also a Gaijin hero in my heart. The Grace knew Michael was involved in that operation. That's so romantic. Grace forced a smile. Did you guys leave each other contact info back then? No. Ivy shook her head regretfully, but I'll get him back, for sure. I secretly added his WeChat. I know where he lives. The interviews end quickly, and the director enters the booth to tell the girls that the ratings for this episode have been climbing. With Ivy's youthful beauty, her legendary experiences in Afghanistan, and all that gossip about her love life in the background, she attracted a large audience. Michael had been here a while, and with one hand resting on the cap of his summer uniform and the other in his pocket, he stood with his uniform straightened outside the door, and saw through the transparent glass the live. He froze for a moment when he saw the man with his back to him, and Grace's co-workers at the TV station came and went, all exchanging pleasantries with Michael, who wouldn't recognize such a handsome, sunny young man. Michael hasn't been here that much, but he's got the looks. And the profession to match. I'm here to pick up Grace. Someone's come up to talk to her. Well, Michael doesn't talk much. Who's in there? The interpreter from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Beautiful, great, Michael laughed. Ivy grew up beautiful and gentle, like the rain in England, soft and gentle, but if you got to know her well, you'd realize there was a toughness to her. At 16 or 17, she'd come a long way to celebrate his birthday. In her early 20s, she'd spent 3 years at a time in the beacons of Afghanistan. The director invites Ivy and Grace to join him for dinner, and Grace, seeing that Michael is already waiting outside, has no desire to socialize. I won't go, Director Zhang and Amelia can go together. Her eyes drifted to the doorway and Director Zhang realized Ivy also saw Michael, and she does not love this kind of entertainment, politely refused. Director Zhang polite, I have something else in the evening. She collected the things she had brought, and went out with Grace a piece of the just as we got to the door. Grace couldn't wait to take Michael's arm. I happen to be doing Ivy's interview today. Michael fidgeted and blocked Grace's hand away, stepping back. Was it? And his eyes fell on Ivy's. Just now he unknowingly stared at Ivy's back for a long time. This moment finally saw the front face. She was dressed in regular clothes today. There is a different kind of beautiful. The Grace sensed Michael's detachment from herself. She maintained a smile on her face, and stood side by side with him. Ivy's experience is very special. It makes me envious. When will I also apply with the station? To become a war correspondent, and what's the point of going to a place like that? A thankless task, Michael snorted softly. The words were directed at Grace, but Ivy felt like she was saying them to herself. People think she's a hero, not realizing she's there to get away from it all. Ivy hooked his lips and smiled. Michael, that's how it is, he said to be lightweight, but the country and the people have the need. He is absolutely in the forefront of the person, I am just saying. Grace said, as if she were pouting, and turned to Ivy. Ivy, I'll leave Michael and I, come visit us sometime. Grace is very enthusiastic. Ivy looked at Grace as she tried again to take Michael's hand, and with a bright light in her eyes, it was Grace who called Michael to pick her up at noon. Michael was driving and asked Grace, what are you going to say about what's going on? Grace said she had something important to talk to him about, and he's on vacation this weekend, so here it is. Grace froze, seemingly forgetting even that she had something important to say. Michael watched the road ahead with an expressionless face. Grace, this girl, she's smarter than anyone. How in the world could it be such a coincidence that when he arrived, Ivy was there? When I go on the show, I forget everything. Look at my memory. Grace blames herself. I went to see General Michael the other day. General Michael asked me, when will we settle down? And my grandfather, they are anxious to have grandchildren, and I'm not sure when I'm going to be able to do it, but I'm sure I'll be able to do it. Michael didn't speak for the moment as he found a wide spot and pulled over to the side of the road and stopped. Grace, he looked solemn. Grace couldn't help but straighten her spine. And what did you say when we met? Grace smiled bitterly. That time Michael could not see her, in the way of her grandfather and Michael's old general of that relationship. Michael treated her has been very courteous. She was sick to call him. She wanted to go shopping on the weekend to call him. She moved to call him. He, as long as there is a vacation, basically will not be refused. She thought that after spending a lot of time together, there'd always be feelings. Michael said, your grandfather is old, the leg is not convenient, if there is any difficulty, you can always look for me. Taylor's a leg is for Michael, old man waist. Michael is a responsible person, will not turn a blind eye. You have difficulties, you can also look for me, I will help, but in love, not marriage, also not. Grace. In a flirtatious way, Michael, it would break old General Michael's heart to know. You said that. I've talked to him. Grace paused and asked, you've thought about it. She's beautiful, smart, has a glamorous career, and her suitors can be lined up from the roof of a 20 or 30-story TV station to the floor below. Grace laughed. Help? What can you help me with? You're a soldier, your pay isn't as high as mine. What difficulties can't be solved with money? Michael, it's you I'm looking at, not your help. Grace took a deep breath. I'm sorry. I'm a little excited. If, one day, you want to get over it, you can come to me. And she hastily unbuckled her seatbelt, opened the car door, and stepped down, almost unsteadily, to Grace, always elegant, stood up straight and straightened her shoulder-length hair. Goodbye. By the time Ivy got home, the episode had dominated the headlines of various portals, with the media and enthusiastic netizens cutting out the highlights and putting them online. And Ivy, lying on her bed, rummaging around, finally found a satisfactory tweet, found in WeChat, added after the number has not sent a message to share the past. After a while, she saw that it showed that it was being typed over there. And Michael must have watched that after waiting for half a day and no movement. Ivy. Shamefully continued to send, the girl in the video wants to be a daughter-in-law for you, what do you think? Michael was running when his cell phone vibrated twice and he stops, pulls out his cell phone, and fiddles with one foot on the edge of the flower bed. But the last time he went back to the compound with Ivy, after Ivy used his cell phone on the way, he got one more person on WeChat as a friend. Michael could imagine Ivy's unbridled expression as she did her little act. She hadn't even tried to hide it from him. Even her avatar was a picture of herself. Michael doesn't have the luxury of deleting someone, letting her account lie in his address book. Who knew that she had taken the initiative to send him a message that boring? Michael had no intention of replying, but accidentally touched the screen and typed in a few inexplicable words that he patiently deleted them, one by one. And was just about to tuck his phone back in when another message came in asking how the girl in the video would do for him as a daughter-in-law. What a mess. Michael suddenly felt like he didn't quite understand the girl's routine anymore. He clicked on the video, and the person who caught his eye was, not coincidentally, the girl who was making waves. Grace asked the girl if she had a favorite, and the girl said yes. A hero of the world, huh? Michael smiled wistfully. If he'd gone back 3 years, he'd have gloated over her adoration. That not good. Ugly. Michael was succinct. This girl said she's not afraid of being ugly, she can get plastic surgery. She's quick to come back. If you don't have a good foundation, you'll still look ugly after plastic surgery. You're almost 30. Why don't you make do? Anyone who wants to be my daughter-in-law is at least one platoon away from making do. The people's soldiers are for the people, so you'll make a sacrifice to solve the marriage problems of young single women. Michael had nothing more to say, slipped his phone into his pocket, zipped it up, and kept running. The Ivy had gotten skinnier and skinnier over the years, and there was nothing he could do about it. Ivy's eyes were bright, and she was extraordinarily witty when she played the smartass, and her lips were as pink as flower petals, but when she opened her mouth there were not a few good things to say. Her look kept rattling and rattling around in his head, and Michael frowned. Every year, new recruits to the ministry have to undergo a 2-month military training program, and Ivy applied for stationing abroad as soon as she joined the ministry that year, so she didn't make the trip. She was supposed to go with the newcomers who joined the ministry this year. In a few days, diplomatic personnel work of a special nature. The military training is therefore more rigorous, but Ivy delicate. 2 months down, I do not know what to become. Rose's point is that having even been to places like Afghanistan, which is often in turmoil, military training is not necessary. Ivy and Rose's relationship had not been deliberately publicized or concealed in the ministry. And colleagues knew more or less that Ivy didn't want to leave a bad impression of having special treatment as soon as she came back. The ministry was doing the same thing as everyone else, and she had to participate in military training, too. The ministry took a special vacation the week before military training to get everyone ready for it. Ivy's booked a flight back to her grandmother's house in England. Grandma was the first generation of diplomats in New China, and after retiring from her diplomatic post, she had been engaged in teaching French at the Institute of Foreign Languages. Grandpa and Grandma were both nostalgic for the old days, and they returned to their old house in England when they got older. Grandpa died when Ivy was in high school, and it was inconvenient for Grandma, an old woman, to remain alone in the old mansion. Rose urged the old man to go back to Washington several times, but was politely refused. She couldn't bear to leave the place where she and her husband had spent their youthful years and sunsets together. Ivy put on her cloth shoes. And it was only when she set her foot on the somewhat slippery lapis lazuli that she really felt she was back. She spent her time here until she was 5 years old. While children don't remember much, she always remembered her grandfather carrying her to buy green dumplings at the old shop during the Qingming festival, and by the small bridges in Riverside where women in Cheongsam speaking in one long soft language, and her grandmother would teach her French while embroidering flowers. She stayed here for just a few years, but the tenderness of the English water town seems to have seeped into her bones. Even if it was later covered by a few leather monkeys in the compound to become cheerful, but the knitted brows of the smile will still inadvertently exude that kind of lingering warmth, and the atmosphere. The old mansion was open, and Ivy lifted her foot over the threshold, having tripped over the high threshold I don't know how many times as a child. Grandma, she whispers. July was back, and Mrs. Lee, who had been taking care of Grandma, answered, and Michael, who had made an appointment, which preceded the Ivy came back once before she left for Afghanistan, 3 years ago. She called her grandmother before she returned home this time and said she would come to see her when she got back. Ivy's surprised that Rigger's brother is here. Michael came to see us 2 or 3 times a year while you were out of the country. Sister-in-law Lee knows the nature of Michael's work. A year's vacation is not a few days. Get free to run to this side, not for the girl and her family is for Hua. While she was talking to the old lady, Sister Lee excitedly led Ivy inside and hearing Sister Lee's words, Ivy's eyes stretched out of the corner of her eyes. I don't know what Granny and Michael were saying, but Ivy heard Michael's soft laughter, as if Granny was telling him embarrassing stories about when she was a little girl. Ivy wanted to listen to some more, but Mrs. Lee went in first. Mrs. Lee, July is back. Ivy just had to follow a piece of it in. Grandma and Michael were sitting in the antique high chair in the main room. Michael was dressed casually today and looked at Ivy with a wry smile when he saw that it was her that had come to Grandma. Ivy always whispers when she talks to Grandma, and when she says that, she's already moved up and crouched down obediently next to the old lady, thinking of you, but finally came back. In there okay, the old lady is particularly excited. Touched Ivy's head, and then go to hold her hand, hate to see her whole body carefully, but the old lady engaged in diplomatic work has also been concerned about international events, know that Afghanistan is unstable and dangerous, she knows that Ivy will go there since she has been worried about it, 3 years all the time is not in mind. Grandma, I'm fine. The old lady saw that Ivy was well, and a heart fell to her feet, and turned her head to look at Michael again, and a smile was evident in her pale eyes. You two are purposely trying to surprise me, an old lady, by coming back and pretending to be one after the other. Michael's eyes were tinted with a faint smile, and he said nothing, just looked at Ivy, and Ivy looked at him with a deep smile in return. I'm not that bad. It was his idea. Michael was very cooperative, and as promised before he came. The old lady looked at the two, kissing and warming up. Under the eyes of the elders cannot suppress the heat. Her eyes fell on Ivy. A few days ago I watched a few of my students in WeChat to send buzzwords. What is it called? Back to the pot. Yes, Michael is to give you back to the pot. The Ivy laughed. The bright-eyed and white-toothed look is very moving, and she got up and reached for the sky-blue teapot and poured water for Grandma and Michael. Because it is back to the old house, she dressed plain and elegant, cotton linen skirt on the plate buckle and broken flowers is also very classical, white wrist wearing a verdant jasper bracelet, is the old lady when she was young with the leader of the visit to Burma brought back from there. The old lady favors her, but does not spoil her. Things like pouring and tasting tea are something you learn from a young age. I saw her move in a fluid and gentle manner, offering her grandmother a cup of tea with both hands, and bringing another cup to Michael. The Michael didn't answer, looking at her with the corners of his mouth slightly curled as Ivy met her gaze with clarity, and after a few seconds of looking at it, her pale pink lips flicked up, and she pouted, her hand sore, and Michael gouged her out and took the teacup, over the top. How dare you, in front of the old lady. The old lady looked at them and smiled. Ivy slightly reddened her face. Grandma, just now you and Brother Shashwan said what bad things about me. The old lady just laughed, and Ivy had to look at Michael with a puzzled look on her face. Michael stifled a laugh, too, and had a pamphlet in his hand at some point, and Ivy knew what it was, and immediately went for it. Michael didn't hide it, and opened the booklet with a flourish right in front of her, and her hand froze in midair. It was a photo album with all of Ivy's pictures up to the age of 5 and a few she'd come back for after that, and I don't know how long Michael watched it before she came in. Grandma said you were very pretty when you were little. Michael's long forefinger traced across the photos on the spread, clicking on a particular one at random. Ivy was 15 or 16 years old at the time, I think, wearing a fitted white cheongsam, sitting on the porch of the old mansion, her eyes staring blankly ahead, and she didn't know what she was looking at. Michael's nature is cool. Not interested in those tender verses, but when he looked at this photo, he remembered the song Rainy Lane that he read when he was a student. A lilac, sad girl. He let out a laugh. Ivy whispers to Michael, what's so funny? Instead of talking about it, he asked Ivy, what were you thinking about when you took this picture? Ivy bent closer to Michael, demurely, and lowered her voice and said, missed you, spent too much time over here that year, wanted to go back to you. And Michael tilted his head back, then flipped the album forward, and Ivy didn't dare go too far. After all, her grandmother was around, and she got up, dutifully standing straight, down. The pictures of her when she was 3 or 4 years old are all souvenirs of her in all kinds of little cheongsams in all kinds of quaint places, with a haughty, she's the beautiest in the whole world look. Scroll further. Don't look. Ivy spread her 5 fingers wide and pressed her hands onto the page. It's a picture of her when she was much younger, the kind where she didn't even have her crotchless pants on. Michael spoke, ambiguity pressed into his voice, having seen it all. Ivy bit the corner of her mouth without a trace, her eyes watering, looking good. The Ivy was born beautiful, could be plain or brimming. She was teasing him, her tone was flirtatious, and her eyes were intentionally wintry. What man in his right mind wouldn't shudder at the sound of that? Michael glanced at the old lady, who hadn't heard what they'd been yakking about. He laughed, and his eyes looked bitterly at Ivy, ugly as a monkey. Male or female? And sister-in-law Lee came in with a basket and talked to the old lady about going to the grocery store. and neither of the two older people noticed their interaction. Ivy volunteered, "Grandma, I'll go. You and Mrs. Lee can wait at home." Michael followed, stood up, flexed his right index finger, dusted off his pants, smiled gently and said to the old lady, "Granny, I'll go with July." And as soon as he left the house, Michael pulled out his cigarettes in no hurry. He walked straight and unhurriedly on the verdant stone slabs with a cigarette in his hand. "A very nice look. You've been coming to see Grandma a lot over the years." Michael replied matter-of-factly that it was only right to come and see his grandmother as she got older. Ivy's pink lips. "I don't believe it. You wish." There's nothing in Michael's eyes. Shavlon brother. She suddenly walked a few steps faster, side by side with him, and suddenly Michael was tickled by something in the palm of his hand, and he stiffened. This girl, so unruly, had stretched out two fingers to tickle he opened his mouth to talk about her, but she beat him to it, her eyes full of witty smiles. "Thank you for accompanying me to act in front of Grandma." The Michael silenced, the old lady looked after them. And if the other knew they were separated, there was no guarantee that the old man wouldn't be angry. Michael's voice was low. "It couldn't always play out like this." Before Michael could finish his sentence, Ivy interrupted, "So, you really don't think about me anymore, Chief, anymore?" Ivy's voice was light and soft, and the end of her voice was light and teasing as she asked him rhetorically, without realizing it. Michael had a little smile in his eyes, and for the time being, no. Ivy had been very active since they met again, and he hadn't responded half as well as he should have. She'd even wondered if she must have taken things too far back then, and he'd never like her again. There will be other people around Michael, like Grace, and even if they don't get together, there will be other people, eventually. He can live without her. Every time I thought about it, Ivy felt so sad that she was dying, but Michael didn't put words in her mouth. "Maybe, there's still hope for her." He did not shake off her hand either, and she turned to take it carefully, and so walked all the way to his palms were rough, a mark left by years of training. She didn't feel the pinch, but instead felt warm and solid. The old mansion was not far from the food court, not a few minutes walk away. England's fruits and vegetables are watery and fresh and brightly colored. Very different from Washington's. Michael looked at the vegetables on the stand, and his eyes couldn't help but go to Ivy's. This girl, as bright and colorful as this fruit and vegetable. Ivy caught Michael's eye and opened her mouth to say, "Do I look good?" Michael's eyes were bright, looking at Ivy with a smile on his face, and said meaningfully, "Ivy, I'm a normal man. Tease me. You know what the consequences are." Before Ivy could react to what Michael meant by that, Michael's hand was already around her waist, forcefully bringing the person into his arms. Ivy slammed into Michael's iron chest. The consequences of flirting with him. Ivy's face burned red as she tried to understand. "It's a food market, people come and go." Ivy had pushed Michael, stood up straight. "And Grandma and Sister Lee eat less meat." Michael bought all the water 8 cents, rare. He is a Washingtonian. Even Ivy cannot recognize all the things he knows. All of them. Ivy's favorites are squirrel, mandarin fish and glutinous rice candy root, so she went back to the fish stall and bought a huge mandarin fish and a few sections of lotus root. Ivy can't cook. And at this point Michael's half-assed with her, while Mrs. Lee and Grandma were busy cooking authentic English food. At noon, Ivy and Michael moved 2 small benches to sit on the patio of the old mansion and chat, harmonizing in the presence of the old man as if they had never been apart. Michael didn't have much vacation, only one night at the old mansion, and had to leave early the next morning. He remembered that his first visit to the old mansion was when he went to military school, when Ivy was still in high school. That summer vacation, he went home to look for her. Found that the little girl is not in the compound. He accompanied the little girl's father at Ivy's home to chat for an afternoon day, only to beat around the bush to find out that she turned out to be back in England's grandmother's home. He booked a plane ticket and left for England. Michael had met Ivy on the Bluestone Path. This day he still remembers. That day, the town was drizzling, the moss on the green stone slabs was growing again, and it was so wet and slippery. Michael to find someone to inquire about the town of an old lady who knows French and has studied abroad. Where the home. Good thing that Rose's family is the area of the famous family of books. The 2 old people and helpful, often teaching foreign languages to the children in the neighborhood. No one in the town does not know. People enthusiastically gave him directions, and the 2 old people are very helpful. Often teaching foreign languages to the children in the neighborhood. No one in the town does not know. People enthusiastically gave him directions. It was still early in the day, and the rain had added to the coolness, and Ivy should still be cowering under the covers at this moment. As he idly surveyed the quaint stores on either side, the morning stores were open, and there was a great deal of crowd and bustle. And Michael got the idea that he might as well buy breakfast and take it to the little girl's place. It was only this one thought, and one more glance at that breakfast bay, that made him realize that there was no escape for him, that little girl, holding a jade-colored oil paper umbrella, just happened to come back to the umbrella she was holding fell to the ground and her pink lips parted slightly in surprise, her watery eyes were full of surprise and delight, she's like a peach blossom in the springtime. Brimming over with. Michael had his own room at the old mansion, next to Ivy's boudoir, where he had stayed when he first came to the old mansion, and which, after he had been with Ivy, his grandmother had left to him. Ivy knocks on the door, and Michael lets someone in. "Grandmother sent me to make your bedding," and Ivy's mouth curved slightly as she looked at Michael with something otherworldly and mischievous in her eyes. Ivy, who spoke of laying out bedding, entered and sat down on the round stool in the room, without the least intention of doing anything about it. "The bedding is in the closet, and the old man keeps it for Michael all year round, and takes it out in the sun from time to time." Michael, not expecting Ivy, turned to get it himself, and in 3 strokes laid it out neatly, and Ivy smiled. "Chief, the bedding was spread out fast enough." She said it ambiguously, her warm, soft voice running through the air, a room full of tingling scents. Michael's whole body froze, and after a long interval, he came straight over to Ivy and looked at her condescendingly. "Not saying that I thought I told you not to tease you." Ivy got up and stood on her tiptoes, her lips pressed against his earlobe. "I've been thinking hard about it, and I still want to tease you about what to do." She breathed in, her hot breath assaulting Michael's ear, brushing his neck, burst after burst, obviously so gentle, but it was like it was crashing into his heart, rubbing out the fire. Michael settled down and pushed the man away, a smile on his lips as he said, "Ivy, let's talk about what happened 3 years ago." It was Ivy's death knell, and he knew she wilted when he mentioned it. Ivy hung her head, looking lost. "I didn't push Amelia down the stairs."